Hi, everyone. I'm Mike Rappaport, Director of the Center for the Study of Constitutional Originalism at the University of San Diego. And I'd like to welcome everyone to San Diego and USD for the 10th annual Hugh and Hazel Darling Foundation Originalism Works in Progress Conference. It's hard to believe it's been 10 years. 10 years. At a 10th year anniversary, it's perhaps appropriate to reflect a little on the history of the conference and what it has accomplished. In the last decade, I believe we have developed a conference that has done much to promote originalist scholarship, providing a forum for the discussion of originalist ideas by experts in originalism. We've also helped to form a community of originalist scholars where both advocates and critics of originalism can examine ideas about the subject in the calm and open-minded setting that best allows intellectual progress. And the conference has showcased the progress that has been made in originalist scholarship through discussions that are at the highest levels of sophistication. For the contributions to the conference that all of you have made over the years, we thank you. For those who are interested, all of the past conferences are available on the center's YouTube channel. And lately, I've been starting to review some of the early conferences. The first conference was especially interesting. It was a bit less finished than the later conferences, and alas, many of us, unsurprisingly, look a good bit younger in the tapes. But it was a good start. One highlight of the first conference was the paper on construction, where four of the leading advocates of construction, Balkin, Barnett, Solem, and Whittington, were in the room, as well as one of the principal critics. The conference has changed a bit over the years as we've tried to improve it. This year was the first year in which we had a page limitation, I think a clear improvement over previous years. We'll certainly be continuing that. Hopefully we can continue to improve the conference over another 10 years. Every year I use this time at the beginning of the conference to review the most important events concerning originalism in the past year. I don't like to be too Supreme Court centric, but for the fourth year in a row, I would say that the most important development involves a change in Supreme Court personnel. And that development is, of course, the retirement of Justice Anthony Kennedy and his replacement by Justice Brett Kavanaugh. Potentially, this is an enormous change for originalism because Kennedy was not really an originalist at all, and it is quite possible that Kavanaugh is a strong originalist. I don't think it's too controversial that Kennedy was not an originalist. In fact, I regard him as a strongly non-originalist justice. It's true that politically he was a swing justice who voted with originalists some of the time, but that hardly makes him an originalist. In over 30 years on the court, he wrote few, if any, opinions from an originalist perspective. With the help of some friends, I was able to identify at most a couple of originalist opinions that he wrote, but with one of them being Alden versus Maine, hardly a model of good originalism. People have tended to view the change from Kennedy to Kavanaugh in terms of politically salient cases and results, such as Roe versus Wade. But the change is likely to be more significant in terms of methodology. Kennedy's non-originalism was important in some less politically salient cases where methodology really mattered. For example, in Noel Canning, involving the Recess Appointments Clause, it was Kennedy's vote that made Justice Breyer's problematic non-originalist opinion the majority decision, rather than Justice Scalia's originalist opinion. My guess, and it's only a guess, is that Kavanaugh would have voted differently. If Justice Kavanaugh is a strong originalist, then that would mean there are 3 strong originalists on the Supreme Court now. And depending on how one counts originalists, that might be the first time in a great many years that such a large number has sat on the court. Of course, 3 originalists is hardly a majority of the Supreme Court, but given that Chief Justice Roberts and Justice Alito are at least fellow travelers, those 3 originalists could have a significant influence. In many 5-4 cases, 3 strong originalists may constitute a majority of the court, which will mean that their views will be particularly important in determining how the decision is written. The real question, though, I think, is whether Kavanaugh is a strong originalist, right? While he claimed to be an originalist at his confirmations hearings, it's still possible he is only a moderate originalist or a weak originalist in the mold of Chief Justice Roberts. Clearly, it's too soon to tell. But there are some initial signs that are, at least from my perspective, not too encouraging. In particular, Kavanaugh may be extremely reluctant to overturn or modify non-originalist precedents. In the oral argument in the Gamble case and in his decision not to join Justice Gorsuch's concurrence in Timbs versus Indiana, there are signs that Kavanaugh may be unwilling to move the laws towards originalist results or interpretations, except in very exceptional cases. Now, while such an approach may be originalist, it would be hard to call it a strong originalism. But as I say, it's still very early days. Let me then end this discussion of what's going on in originalism in the past year with some discussion of some of the originalist scholarship. In the past year, 2 very significant books by critics of originalism have been published. While originalism is often discussed in the law reviews, it's been addressed less often in books. And that 2 authors critical of originalism have devoted book-length projects to criticisms of originalism suggests originalism's importance. One of those books is by Jonathan G. Knapp, who is going to be here. He's stuck on a plane delay. His second creation, Fixing the American Constitution in the Founding Era, argues that the meaning of the Constitution was not fixed at the time of its enactment, and that it took some years before a consensus formed about its interpretation. Another book is by Eric Segal, entitled Originalism as Faith, which Eric presented here at last year's conference. At this point, I really can't resist mentioning 2 other recent books that serve to fill important gaps within originalism, even though they were not published in the last year. First, there's a very good introduction to originalism by Ilan Werman entitled A Debt Against the Living. And secondly, Kurt Lash is publishing later in the year some important materials on the Reconstruction Amendments, a sort of sorely needed founder's constitution type of book for these extremely important amendments. Well, putting together a conference of this sort involves a great deal of work, so I'd like to thank various people. And first and foremost, as I do every year, I want to thank Mike Ramsey. Mike and I co-plan the conference every year, and I just couldn't do it without his help, and I'm extremely grateful for his help. I also want to thank Steve Smith, who helps put the conference together as well. Thanks also go to Dean Stephen Ferrulo for his support for both the conference and the center. In addition, I want to thank Stacy Groff, who's sitting outside, for helping to organize the conference and doing a million things. And I want to thank my research assistants, Peter Keshavan, Nicole Baldwin, and Joseph Seipel, for their help. And finally, I want to thank Rick Stack and the Hugh and Hazel Darling Foundation for their generous support. Their grant for the center has made possible the continuation of this conference, as well as the host of other activities that the center runs. So thank you so much to them.